Hi friends, welcome to another lecture of the Rapid Review series, and today we will discuss the topic pericarditis. So in this lecture, we will first discuss the definition and etiology of pericarditis, then the classification, what are the clinical features, what all investigations are required, and finally the management part. Definition is very simple. As the name suggests, pericarditis is the inflammation of the pericardium, which is the outermost layer covering the heart. Now, if we discuss the common causes of pericarditis, it can either be idiopathic, that is, the cause is unknown. It can be caused by infections like viral infections, pyogenic, tuberculosis, fungal, syphilis. So, the viruses which can lead to pericarditis include Coxsackie A, Coxsackie B, Ecovirus, as well as HIV. The pyogenic infections include pneumococcus, staphylococcus, legionella, etc. Tuberculosis is the most common infectious cause in India. Fungal causes include histoplasmosis and candidiasis. It can also be caused by syphilis and other parasites. Other causes include acute myocardial infarction, metastatic neoplasm, hypothyroidism, radiation therapy, chronic renal failure, connective tissue disorders like rheumatoid arthritis and SLE, drug reactions especially due to procainamide and hydralazine, autoimmune following heart surgery as well as MI. So if the autoimmune pericarditis develop following MI, it will be called as Dressler syndrome. And finally, trauma can also lead to pericarditis, that will be hemorrhagic pericarditis. Now coming on to the classification, depending upon the duration, pericarditis can be acute if it is lasting for less than 6 weeks, subacute if it is for 6 weeks to 6 months, and chronic pericarditis will be there for more than 6 months. Now another classification is depending on the nature of the inflammation. So depending on the nature of pericardial inflammation, it may be classified as fibrinous, serous, hemorrhagic and purulent. So fibrinous is when there is fibrinous exudate which may heal and form varying degrees of adhesion formation. Serous pericarditis is a condition which produces large effusion of turbid straw-colored fluid with high protein content. Hemorrhagic pericarditis is usually due to malignant disease like carcinoma of breast or bronchus and lymphoma. And finally, the purulent pericarditis may develop as a complication of septicemia or by direct spread from intrathoracic infection or by a penetrating injury. So this was all about the classification, which can be depending on the duration into acute, subacute and chronic, and depending on the nature of inflammation, which can be fibrinous, serous, hemorrhagic or purulent. Now coming on to the clinical features, we will first discuss the symptoms, then we will discuss the signs. So the most common symptom by which the patients present is the pain of pericardial effusion, that is pericardial pain. The pain is typically sharp and retrosternal in location, which radiates to shoulder and neck area, specifically to the trapezius muscle. Now the pain is aggravated during deep breathing, movement, position change or lying down, coughing, exercise and swelling. On the other hand, the pain relieves on sitting up and leaning forward. Now, when we consider the non-specific symptoms which are associated with pericarditis, these include low-grade fever and malaise, and dyspnea can occur when there is large pericardial effusion which can compress adjacent bronchi and lung and therefore produce dyspnea. And this specific sign is known as Ewart sign. So this was the symptoms, which is pericardial pain and non-specific symptoms. Now coming on to the signs, on auscultation, we can hear pericardial friction rub. This is a high-pitched superficial scratching sound which occurs due to movement of the inflamed pericardium. Now the second one is pulsus paradoxus. It is typically weakness or disappearance of arterial pulse during the inspiration. Now the clear explanation to pulsus paradoxus is that it refers to an exaggerated fall in patient's blood pressure during inspiration by greater than 10 millimeter of mercury. So normally during inspiration the blood pressure will fall, the systolic blood pressure will fall up to 10 millimeters. If it is falling more than 10 millimeter of mercury, it is considered as pulsus paradoxus, which is a typical feature of pericarditis or tamponade. Also, it can lead to cardiac tamponade, which is accumulation of pericardial fluid under pressure, and constructive pericarditis, in which there is scarring and consequent loss of elasticity of the pericardial sac. Now let's discuss the investigations to be done in cases of pericarditis. First of all, blood investigations will reveal leukocytosis, specifically neutrophilia in cases of bacterial pericarditis, lymphocytosis in cases of viral pericarditis, and there will be raised ESR in each case of pericarditis. Now when we consider cardiac enzymes, these are normal unless the pericarditis has associated myocarditis. These will include CPK-MB and troponin T. Now the most important investigation will be ECG. So in pericarditis, there will be widespread concave upwards ST elevation. So this concave upwards ST elevation will be seen in multiple leads, particularly lead 1, 2, AVL, AVF and V1 to V3. Now there will be associated reciprocal ST depression in two leads, that is AVR and V1. So all the leads will be having concave upwards ST elevation except AVR and V1, in which there will be reciprocal ST depression. Now one more characteristic ECG finding of pericarditis is depression of the PR segment. If there is development of pericardial effusion, there will be low voltage complexes and presence of electrical alternance. Now coming on to the chest X-ray. X-ray is usually normal in cases of pericarditis, but if the effusion has developed, then characteristic X-ray findings will include pear-shaped or money bag water bottle appearance. Now echocardiography is used for the confirmation of pericardial effusion, and CT and cardiac MRI may be useful when there is thickening or inflammation of pericardium as well as myocardium. Now paracentesis will be required for cases of diagnostic purposes if there is pericardial effusion. Now let's see the differences between ECG of acute pericarditis as well as acute ST elevation MI. So we will differentiate based on the following points. First of all, when we consider the shape of the ST segment, it is concave upwards in cases of pericarditis and convex upward in cases of acute ST elevation MI. Reciprocal ST segment changes are usually absent in acute pericarditis and will be present in the reciprocal leads in the ST elevation MI. When we consider the ST segment changes, these are usually diffuse in pericarditis except in AVR and V1, where we have seen there will be depression. In ST elevation MI, the location of ST segment changes depends on the coronary artery which is affected. Pathological Q waves are absent in pericarditis while present in ST elevation MI. Depression of PR segment is characteristic of pericarditis, and the concomitant presence of ST and T changes will be present in MI. Now what does this mean? In pericarditis, the T wave inversion will occur, but it will occur after the ST segment has normalized. On the other hand, in acute STEMI, the T wave inversion as well as ST segment elevation occur simultaneously. So this was the difference between the ECG of pericarditis and STEMI. Now let's discuss the final part, that is the management of pericarditis. So first of all, we have to treat the underlying cause. For example, if there is tuberculosis, we will give ATT. Uremia will be managed for CKD, and for autoimmune diseases, we will treat the particular disease, whether rheumatoid arthritis or SLE. Secondly, patient has to take adequate bed rest and avoid physical activity. Now, what is the role of analgesics? The pain of pericarditis is usually relieved by oral NSAIDs. It also decreases the inflammation in idiopathic as well as viral pericarditis. Now, when we consider the NSAIDs, aspirin in the dose of 600 mg every 4 hourly is the drug of choice for patient with a recent MI, specifically if they are developing pericarditis. Ibuprofen can also be used in the dose of 300 to 800 mg TDS, which can be given till the pain and pericardial effusion disappears and ESR CRP values return to the normal. It will usually take 7 to 10 days for a patient to recover from pericarditis. Indomethacin, since it is a more potent anti-inflammatory drug, therefore it has a dose of 25 mg which should be given 3 times a day. Colchicine 0.5 mg in BD dose can be added to NSAIDs. Finally, corticosteroids at a dose of 20 mg per day prednisolone for 2 to 4 weeks can be added and should be reserved for patients with an immune cause or the patients who do not respond to the NSAIDs. It is important to note that colchicine as well as corticosteroids reduce the symptoms but does not hasten the cure of pericarditis. If we are dealing with purulent pericarditis, we will give the antimicrobial therapy according to the culture, do pericardiocentesis, and can also perform surgical drainage if required. Now, when we consider the indications of hospitalization, fever 38 degrees centigrade or more, leukocytosis, large pericardial effusion, lack of response to NSAIDs even after 1 week of therapy, acute trauma, cardiac tamponade, immunosuppressed state, and recurrent pericarditis. So all these are indications for hospitalization. So this was all about the lecture. I hope you like it. Thank you so much, guys.